All right, good morning, everyone. I'm here today to dive into the economic profile of Mexico, as we can see here. I chose Mexico because of its close relationship with the U.S., and I have a lot of personal connections with Mexico. I actually served my mission around a lot of people from Mexico. Lots of them had come to the U.S. For better opportunities, so I took this opportunity to understand more of why they might have left and understand their economy, kind of their um, everything about them. So Mexico's classification is moderately free, um, which suggests a hybrid economic structure. This economy uh, is where market principles are certainly present and respected, but they operate alongside significant regulatory hurdles and state interference. And we'll get into that, what those are in a second. Um, Being ranked 80th globally means Mexico is competitive with the world average, but it is far from reaching its full potential, lagging behind some of the top free economies. This score is a baseline that tells us there's a substantial amount of private sector activity, but not nearly enough to fully harness the country's natural and human capital. Um, so, yeah, the data here highlights the biggest and absolute institutional roadblock, which is going to be here. Um, Basically, the rule of law is pretty weak. It has a low score of 41 points, and that's for property rights and which is below the world average. Um, there's a lot of corruption. Rampant corruption acts as a major obstacle to business confidence, with a score of only 30 points. Impact uncertain contract enforcements, precarious security, and large informal sector. Uh, Undermine business freedom and efficiency. Basically, that means there's a lot of private sector stuff going on. There's a lot of violence, and there's not a whole lot of regulation around rule of law. They do have it, but it's not. There's still a lot of corruption, and we've likely heard about that in the news, the cartels and different things in Mexico. You probably have had people tell you stories about that, right? So that's really the biggest factor that kind of gets in the way of a good economy to a great economy in Mexico. Um, and uh, is actually interesting because um, the the property rights score is 41, like I mentioned before, and because of that, there's a lot of instability. Without secure property rights, there is pretty much little to no incentive for companies and individuals to invest heavily in land, machinery, or new technology, because they're not sure that their assets will be protected by the government, right? And so they have a hard time putting trust into those institutions. Um, this lack of security funnels large amounts of economic activity into the informal sector, which again is those cartels and those other things that I mentioned previously, um, weakening the formal economy and eroding the tax base, and ultimately limiting the resources available for effective governance. So, if we get into a little bit of the culture grams analysis, this is a little bit about uh, their demographics and development and different things. Um, I hope you can see it. My little camera's hopefully not in the way, but um, there's a large amount of people, large amount of land in Mexico. Capital is Mexico City. Um, Human Development Index ranks 83rd out of 192, so that's about half, a little bit less than half, which that indicates how developed the country is, and so it's not a third world country, but it's also not very developed, and that goes into things like road systems and transportation, different things. Again, going back to that instability that I mentioned here, the rule of law is pretty weak throughout the country, and so all these other things are going to kind of cascade down. Um, but this kind of shows where Mexico truly shines and remains competitive globally. Um, this the scores for business freedom mentions are 71.9 and trade freedom 72.2. Those are pretty good. This confirms that for businesses able to navigate the legal and security risks, the businesses that overcome those hurdles of what we mentioned previously, Mexico offers a relatively streamlined process for starting up and integrating into international commerce, particularly through free trade agreements. And so there's a lot of companies, a lot of big companies that they have overcome these different hurdles. Um, there's a, there's a lot of companies that will you know um, have things made in Mexico, and it's and then shipped to other countries, including the U.S. So, um, like I'm pretty sure one example, there's a company called Thursday Boots. They assemble all their stuff, all their boots and shoes and stuff in Mexico, and then they ship them out to um, internationally. So, and that's why a lot of companies do that, and it remains an attractive manufacturing and export hub, despite all those flaws that we mentioned before. Um, so if we get into the Big Mac index, this I thought was interesting to learn about because it kind of shows, uh, the economy versus other places. And so a Big Mac costs $4.60 US dollars, um, and it it illustrates the economic concept of purchasing power in Mexico. So for example, in the U.S., I think it was $5.30. So the Mexican peso is pretty close to what the American dollar is, and we'll get into that in the next slide. But it's cheaper than the U.S. one, obviously. Um, this is kind of a really useful way to show the differences. And I was very surprised looking at some of the different countries how low it was in certain countries and how high it was in Mexico, respectively. I thought it would be lower than that, but um, this undervaluation isn't necessarily a flaw in the currency system. It could be a reflection of deeper structural economics. The Big Mac's cost is largely determined by non-tradable local inputs, um, local labor costs, and commercial rent. So that's uh, basically meaning because the wages are lower in Mexico, and maybe the land, the resources to pay, I don't know, let's say, uh, you know, to make the buns for the burger, for example, you need flour, water, eggs, maybe a couple other things. Those things are cheaper in Mexico than they are to produce here, and that goes for the labor costs as well. Someone getting paid minimum wage, 11.25, I think it is right now in the U.S., may be getting paid 7.25 in Mexico. So it costs less to produce. And again, that goes back to why companies are, um, they use Mexico as a way to export their goods. So if we get into the Mexican currency, so I touched on this obviously. Mexican peso is significantly undervalued compared to U.S. dollar. Main reason is simple, just like I previously mentioned, and yeah, because of the rule of law, manifest corruption, weak property rights, and security challenges. This um, makes it makes the Mexican peso significantly lower than the U.S. dollar, for example. It's moderately free, so businesses do and can do business there. They again use that as a way to lower their lower their costs of doing business. And yeah, if so that's kind of what I have there. If you have any questions, let me know. But here are my sources. I mentioned I have them super scripted, as you can see, kind of here, and in the other slides as well. So, um, yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful.